Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into some seriously interesting stuff today, like crypto going mainstream.
Mainstream is an understatement, honestly.
Right, and get this, we're talking about its political ties. And I'm not just talking about like Silicon Valley trying to lobby Washington. We're talking Kamala Harris, Donald Trump.
It's wild how crypto is bridging these worlds, right? Like you've got Wall Street and tech trying to figure it out, and then you've got politicians and even like national security folks all thrown into the mix.
That's a lot, but that's what we're here for, right, to break it all down.
Exactly.
So, okay, cryptocurrency. It's not just for like tech people in their basements anymore, is it?
Not even close. This is becoming a major force in, well, everything. Finance, politics, even national security, like I said.
And politicians are definitely taking notice. We've seen Vice President Kamala Harris meeting with, crypto big players, Coinbase, Ripple. What's your take on that? What kind of power does she actually have when it comes to crypto?
It's definitely interesting, because crypto, it's not just a small group of people anymore. It's a voting bloc. And that's something politicians, they can't ignore that. And unlike previous administrations, I think Harris has a real chance to actually put some policies in place, not just, talk about them.
Okay, so what kind of policies are we talking about here? What could actually change, and what would that even mean for someone like me who, is just trying to figure out their investment portfolio?
Well, we could see anything from clearer tax guidelines, which I think everyone would appreciate too, like regulations on stablecoins, DeFi, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
A big one to watch is how they handle CBDCs, central bank digital currencies.
Right.
Harris seems pretty interested in creating some kind of like framework for all of this, one that encourages innovation but also protects people. Depending on how that goes, it could change a lot, from how easy it is to invest to like if crypto becomes part of our everyday lives, like using it to buy groceries or whatever.
Okay, so big potential changes from the current administration. Got it. But now for something completely different. Donald Trump. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I'm thinking it too, not exactly the first person you think of when you hear the word crypto, right? Yeah. But he went ahead and launched his own line of those digital trading cards.
Yeah.
And these aren't like your typical NFTs either.
You're right. Those trading cards were a smart move. See, a lot of these NFTs, you need to know what you're doing. Like, you need to understand crypto wallets and exchanges and all that.
It's a whole thing, yeah.
It is. But Trump, he made his cards easy to buy. You could use a regular credit card, which meant basically anyone could buy them. That opened it up to a huge audience, especially his base.
It's pretty savvy when you think about it. So what was he really going for with that approach? It seemed very deliberate.
It definitely was. See, by making them simple to buy, he kind of like sidestepped the whole complicated crypto thing, right? He made it easy. And the subject matter, I mean, come on, classic Trump, right? Those trading cards, they just resonated with his supporters. It was a really clever way to tap into that existing interest and maybe even like bring new people into the crypto world. And don't forget, he's dabbled in this before. Remember that Bitcoin bar in New York City?
Right, the one he visited.
Yeah, so he's been paying attention.
So he's clearly been, dipping his toes in the crypto world for a while now. What's the bigger picture here?
I think it shows that he sees the potential. And not just financially, but politically too. Whether you agree with his politics or not, you can't deny that he understands how to leverage these big trends, those digital collectibles. That was about connecting with his base and building a presence in the crypto world. It's a power move.
Interesting. So we've got politicians, former politicians. It seems like everyone's realizing they need to figure out this crypto thing, huh?
It's the future, or at least a big part of it.
Okay, so we've talked about crypto going mainstream, and it's only getting more intense. But let's switch gears for a second and talk about something else that's on everyone's mind, the housing market. And honestly, the numbers are looking a little scary right now. We're seeing a home price-to-income ratio of 7.2x.
Ouch. Yeah,
That's a lot higher than even during that 2008 housing bubble.
It is. And the thing is, it's not just about the prices going up. It's a supply and demand problem at its core. We're just not building enough homes to meet the demand, especially in those like really desirable areas, the places with good job markets.
So it sounds like we have a supply problem, but what's the solution? It's not like we can just build a bunch of houses overnight.
No, it's not magic, unfortunately, but there are definitely things we could be doing differently. A big part of it is looking at those zoning laws and building regulations. You'd be surprised how much those local regulations actually restrict building new housing. especially those multifamily units, which are super important for affordability.
So are you saying that sometimes those rules that are supposed to protect neighborhoods are actually making the housing crisis worse?
Sometimes, yeah. It's a complex problem, that's for sure. Local governments are trying to balance the needs of the people who already live there with the need for more housing. But when the supply is artificially low like that, the prices are just going to keep going up. It makes it impossible for a lot of people to even think about owning a home.
It makes sense when you put it like that. So we've got crypto going mainstream, politicians scrambling to keep up, and a housing market that's leaving a lot of people behind. Stick with us, though, because we're going to dive into some potentially good news. We've got a surprising investing strategy that might just change the way you think about the markets. Plus, we'll be exploring how all of this ties into the big picture. All right, so we're talking investing, and I know you hear this all the time, like buy low, sell high, right?
Age-old
Yeah,
advice.
exactly. Yeah. But what if I told you that when it comes to the S&P 500, that might not actually be the best strategy?
Now you're talking about that research on investing at all-time highs. It's pretty wild stuff. Basically, they looked at data from like 1988 to today, and they found that if you had bought at the previous all-time high and then just held on to it, even for like 1, 3, 5 years,
Yeah.
you would have actually done better than most other strategies.
See, that feels so wrong. Why would investing when the market's, like, peaking be a good thing? It feels counterintuitive.
It's all about momentum, really. Think of it like a snowball, you know? Once it starts rolling downhill, it just keeps picking up steam. Doesn't mean you should throw all your money in at the highest point, but it does show how powerful these long-term trends can be.
Okay, so it's more nuanced than just, hey, buy at the peak. But are there any, like, red flags to watch out for?
Oh, absolutely. You always want to understand what's actually driving that growth, you know? Is it solid or is it just hype? And diversification is key. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially at market highs. And remember, be prepared for some ups and downs. Even in a bull market, there will be dips. Having a long-term perspective is crucial.
Solid advice as always. It really comes back to that idea that knowledge is power, especially with investing. Okay, we've got crypto, we've got this, like, mind-bending approach to investing, seeing some connections here.
Definitely starting to see a bigger picture emerge.
Right. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I want to circle back to something else we touched on, national security. Specifically, President Biden wants to ban Chinese and Russian software in U.S. cars, especially those fancy ones with all the internet-connected bells and whistles. What's going on there?
Well, it highlights how much our world has changed, even in just the last few years. Cars are relying more and more on software, which opens up a whole new can of worms, right? Espionage, cyber attacks. It's not just about someone hacking your car stereo anymore. We're talking about critical infrastructure here.
Okay, now you're making me a little nervous. But for the average person who's, just trying to get from point A to point B, how does this really affect them?
Think about it. Your car, your phone, your house, they're all part of this giant network now. And all that interconnectedness, it makes us vulnerable. What seems like a small thing, like foreign software in cars, it can actually snowball into something much bigger. It's a reminder that cybersecurity matters, even in places you might not expect.
It's like they say, everything's connected, except now we're seeing how those connections play out in the real world, and not always in a good way.
Exactly. And the more we learn, the more we start to see those connections, the patterns. It's like putting together a giant puzzle.
And each of these topics is another piece. Speaking of putting things together, let's do a quick recap. We talked about cryptocurrency going mainstream, its impact on politics, national security, the whole 9 yards.
It's a lot.
It is. And then we explored that unconventional investing strategy, still mind-blowing, by the way, and we dove into the complexities of the housing market.
And how nothing is as simple as it seems.
Exactly. There's always more to uncover, which is, kind of the point of all this. Okay, so we've gone from crypto to the housing crisis to national security, and honestly, it feels like, I don't know, like we're seeing this whole web of connections that we didn't even realize was there before.
It's like everything's connected, right? Like all these different areas are actually way more intertwined than we tend to think about.
And it really hits home with that housing crisis, because it's easy to get caught up in all the numbers and the economics of it all, but at the end of the day, it's impacting real people. It's preventing families from buying their first homes, putting the whole idea of like building generational wealth further out of reach. And in some places, it's even leading to people getting pushed out of their own neighborhoods. It's a real human cost.
It is, and it's something we can't afford to ignore. The lack of affordable housing just makes everything harder for families who are already struggling.
For sure. And it reminds us that behind every headline, there are people dealing with the consequences.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to not be afraid to ask those tough questions, and to hold our leaders accountable for finding solutions.
Absolutely. Like we were saying before, knowledge is power. And honestly, the whole thing about investing at all-time highs has really stuck with me. It just goes against everything we're told about investing.
It's definitely counterintuitive, right? We're so used to hearing buy low, sell high, but then you see the data on the S&P 500.
And it makes you rethink everything.
It really does. Understanding that those market forces, that momentum, it can completely change your perspective.
It's like we have to be willing to challenge what we think we know about, well, everything. Because the world's changing so fast, and our thinking has to keep up.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Stay curious, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to navigate, well, everything life throws your way.
Perfectly said. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring those connections and keep asking those questions.